Hey all, out on a walk today. It's a little bit colder today. I love that. I love the cold. I feel like I was designed for the cold. So it's nice that it's getting a bit colder where I live. Today, going to just talk about some of my recent explorations with trying to use AI with sensitive data. So for a bit of context, I'm building a spending tracker, finance planner app for people, mostly for families, and it's actually getting pretty far along. It's coming together really well. And what I'm working on now is doing importing. So we're starting with just a CSV, CSV file. And the idea is that you import it. You can import it into the system and it will populate the system with entries from that CSV. Now, what I want to do is allow people to upload any CSV from any source. It could be PayPal, could be their bank, could be whatever, could be their own CSV, and just have the AI and just have the system figure out what this data is and where it should go, right? Rather than kind of asking users to have to manually triage every single thing. Like that's so painful and laborious. So I was thinking AI could help me with this. This kind of feels like a problem space that it would really shine with. So at a very high level, the approach I'm planning on doing is effectively taking the user's account list that they've created in the app, which is a nested structure, taking their last, I think it's up to a few hundred income and expense events in the system, and then taking their CSV, bundling that all together with a prompt with AI and saying, like, figure this out. That's the high level. But more accurately, it kind of sends them all off and says, like, please, like, for every row in this, I don't know what the shape is of this data. I don't know what the columns mean. So the AI kind of needs to figure out what which column is, say, the amount column or description column or whatever it happens to be. And then also, okay, based on like where should this data go? Like which account should it go into? And that's why I send the historical data as well, so you can see like, oh, I can see an expense that kind of looks like this one, which you put in this account, and so this would make sense to put it here. But also, there's a few more like interesting rules in the system about how income and expenses kind of get distributed. So I'm going to pass that along, or can be distributed, I should say, along as well as part of that sort of message. But the big idea is that the AI can help me, one, understand the format of the CSV, because I won't know. It could be anything, and which fields that I, mean what. And then also that assignment of where it thinks it should go, and give back effectively like a reasoning and a confidence rating for each of those entries, each of those assignments. Now, I've simplified a few things, but that's the big idea. So, like, I'd love to be able to do that, right? But how can I do that in a way that's not going to violate, users' privacy, right? This is financial data. I don't just want to be flippant about how it's used, right? I don't want it to be used for training data for other AIs out there, right? Like this data is trusted data. So what can I do? Now, I've gone kind of full circle on this just to sort of start with the lead. So I was originally looking into Anthropic, and they have a policy where they say, look, anything that you send to us, we're not going to use for training data. We only store it for 7 days and then we remove it. And I was kind of okay with that. I was like, yeah, that kind of makes sense. But I was speaking to my wife and she's like, I don't want to, I don't like the idea of my bank account details and various other things going off to this third party where it's basically like, trust me, bro, we won't do anything with your data. And I was like, oh, all right, okay. I'm going to look into this a bit more. So then I went, okay, what if I still used say Anthropic, but another model provider. But I scrubbed the data before it went there. So I went down this big rabbit hole of how to do that. And it turns out Microsoft already has a tool for this, which can be used to scrub user data. It's a tricky problem. And from what I can tell, it's effectively a huge pattern matching kind of library, because you can't really send it off to AI to say, hey, what data in here is sensitive, because you've then also sent it off to AI, right? So you kind of have to do it. And I played with that for a while. The Microsoft one was actually really cool. I played with, some new things I hadn't done before. I spun up my own servers on, I think it was called Railway was the first one, and then Fly.io. And the idea was I spun up this service that, I vibe coded the service, but the idea was that so this library is a Python library. It was a Python web server, and you would pass it CSV data. I would basically pass it the data I wanted, and it would strip out all of the personally identifiable information and then send it back to me. But because it's running on my own server, I can be more sure that it's not being stored somewhere that I don't know about. So that's pretty cool, right? I kind of got that working, but then I started testing and I found that even that, the Microsoft one, I just found it wasn't very, it just wasn't that great at doing what it needs to do. The trouble is with this pattern matching, you can get a lot of false positives. So things it starts redacting that it shouldn't redact. So, and you can kind of get around that by having your own regex as well, which I went down that path. So for numbers and dates, you'd be pretty confident that it's not going to strip them out. But it would do weird things it would change mum's birthday, and it would take out mum and say that was a name, which is kind of fine. But then other times it would be an actual name and it would not take it out. And I was kind of looking over the data that it scrubbed, and I was finding that even after a decent amount of tweaking, sometimes it would just have a lot of either things it was scrubbing that probably it shouldn't, and there was a lot of things that it should have scrubbed that it didn't. And so, I was just sort of unsure what to do. Maybe just keep tweaking, keep refining. But then I had this sort of idea prompted by my friend Matt Robinson, who's working on a different problem. He kind of inspired me to think about, okay, well, maybe I could just actually host my own AI, right? Put my own model somewhere, host it myself, and cut off its access. So the model is it can only accept input, output text. It can't speak to the internet. So if I don't give it the tools to be able to speak to the internet, then it can't. So effectively, I would put it somewhere, wrap it in a web server, say, do this work and get back the response. And that actually, I'm still thinking that is a cool idea that I want to explore. But and that's sort of, I think, where in my mind, a really nice technical destination is. But what I found, and again, this is not after vigorous testing, but just what I found is that hosting at least good models that kind of that would be smart enough to give that kind of wow factor for my app, they cost a lot to host. I was running some of the numbers and I was looking at about $100 to $400 a month to host it myself, which if you had a huge amount of potential volume, absolutely worth it. But for this little startup, it's a really big investment in that. Now, yes, I could probably tweak that and make it, spin down, spin up. But the reality is that it seems like it takes quite a lot of resources to run your own AI. Now, again, I'm not an expert in this. I'm totally open to saying, oh, maybe I should tweak this setting or use this other model, and that one, is more CPU rather than. So maybe some models can be run more on the CPU, but even just having a look into it, I've sort of also just thinking about I actually want this to work really well. And some of these cheaper models, while they're still amazing, there's a lot more hallucinations or mistakes, whatever. I kind of just want it to work well, especially for the app that I'm building. I want users to be able to import data and it just kind of be almost magical in how well it can do these things. And some of the better models are actually quite magical in how they do it. So I kept researching, and I then also discovered that Anthropic has if you sign up for, at least for their Teams plan, they have a 0-day retention policy. So what that means is they won't retain the data that is sent to them at all, that you send to them. And so I'm kind of coming to be at peace with that idea of just using Anthropic directly and relying on basically their guarantees that, yes, we won't use your data for training data, and yes, we won't actually retain your data at all if you have that 0-day retention. And then I guess just being transparent. So for my application, my thinking is I'll just be very transparent about what's happening, who's getting the data, what does that mean, and sort of pointing to their guarantees. Because at the end of the day, I don't know. Like, Anthropic says this stuff. Like, I don't know. I don't know if it's real. I don't know if they're actually storing it. You know, there's a lot of, like, at least from my perspective, like, trust me, bro, kind of, we're not doing that. But I can't personally validate that. So that's sort of where I'm at. I think, at least to start with, I've sort of become comfortable with the idea of just using Anthropic directly. From what I can see, it seems to be a fairly standard pattern, even for sensitive data, to use that like approach, relying on the 0-day retention and the no storing of the data guarantees from Anthropic as sort of an okay to, potentially send sensitive data there. Now, again, please, if you know more about this topic, reach out to me. I'd love to hear about it. I actually haven't done this yet in production or anything like that. I'm just still exploring and figuring out what to do. I think, in my mind, the best outcome would be if I could run a cheap by myself on my own server, like my own managed server, that I can speak to directly. That also, I guess, has the same or similar sort of smartness as some of the higher end Anthropic models. So I'm sort of thinking of pitching it, what I'm trying to do, like a sonnet level for those who are aware of these models. So not their latest, their absolute beast opus, and not their super quick one, which is Haiku. So the one that kind of sits in the middle, I think, is the sweet spot for what I'm trying to do. And then I'm also like, well, even if I spin up my own server, if it's managed by someone, presumably they can see that traffic going between. Maybe, I don't know, I have to look into that as well. Like, do those providers keep logs of the requests? But then does HTTPS help me with that? I don't know. I'm kind of in a realm of, I don't really know what the best thing to do is. So while I'm building out, I'm just going to just start with just using Anthropic directly, just get it working. And then sort of before I go to production, doing a loop back and seeing if I can get that private AI working, do a bit more work there. And then, if I can't, I'm kind of okay with the idea of just informed consent. So basically, before anyone uses these features, just sort of calling out what's happening, where it's going, what their guarantees are, and kind of just leaving it at that. People that choose not to use it, like, I get it. But yeah, a private cloud, private AI could potentially make that issue kind of go away, which would be lovely. But yeah, just the hosting costs seem to be pretty enormous. Yeah, there are some thoughts of mine. Hope you found them interesting, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.